Well, hey there, Internet people. Welcome back to Greenwing Gaming. It's Monday, so you know what that means. Time for another hobby discussion video. Today, I thought we'd continue on with our series of videos of advice for newbies. For you veteran players out there, I'm sorry, I have a whole month of these. I promise we're getting to more in-depth stuff soon. But for today's video, I thought I'd continue on a little bit in the same vein as the last video. If you haven't seen it already, the last video was tips for people just starting out in the hobby. But those tips were more big picture things, kind of a mentality approach. Today's advice is going to be the opposite. Rather than things you should do, here's a couple things you really shouldn't do. Mistakes to avoid, and they're going to be a little more granular. They're going to be a little more specific than stuff from the last video. These are things that I wish someone had told me when I was just getting started. It would have saved me a lot of frustration and torn out hair. You think I'm bald by choice? No, this was the hobby that did this to me. So yeah, I'm hoping I can maybe spare you guys a little aggravation, save you a little time, maybe even a little money. And so yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we jump into that, I would like to remind you guys that I'm just starting out on YouTube. This is literally, I think, the third video that'll be up on the channel, maybe the fourth. And if you guys could take the time to maybe drop it a like, maybe consider subscribing, it would really help me out. A little act of kindness for a stranger on the internet. And we must praise Algorithmo. This is a truth of YouTube. But with all of that self-promotion out of the way, let's just get into it. Okay, so first mistake to avoid when you're just starting out in the hobby: throwing away your spare bits. Don't do that. Do not throw away your spare bits. And to clarify what spare bits are, in pretty much any Warhammer kit that you buy, not even Warhammer, just almost any kit you buy from Games Workshop, or even in miniature wargaming in general, there's going to be a few pieces that you end up not using. They might end up being purely cosmetic, or they could just be optional heads, shoulder pads, arms, whatever, weapons options. There's going to be a few pieces when you get to the end of building your kit that you didn't use. The natural instinct for a lot of people that I fell into when I was just starting was to just toss out the stuff you didn't use, because what do you even need it for? But the thing is, if you don't throw that stuff out, if you hold on to it a little bit, you're going to start to notice that after a while, you literally have enough pieces left over to build a Frankenstein's monster miniature. Just slap together pieces from a bunch of different sources to come up with a completely unique mini that nobody actually sells. While that might sound horrifying at first, it can actually be a lot of fun. It's a process known as kit bashing, of just taking pieces from a bunch of kits to make something completely unique that adds some character to your army. I've ended up doing it with a lot of my stuff. Most of the squad leaders in my Dark Angels collection are at least a little bit kit bashed to make them unique and to make them stand out, so when I'm removing minis, I know not to remove my sergeant. That's going to make more sense to people who have played the game, but hopefully, even if you're new, you'll have some idea why it's a good idea to keep the leader around. But yeah, holding on to your bits, which I just realized sounds a lot dirtier out of context, but whatever, we're gonna roll with it. It can be a great way to give yourself some options, save yourself some aggravation, and maybe even save yourself some money if you want to slap together a character, but you realize that none of the characters available really fit what you were looking for. You don't have to go trolling for a third-party mini. You can just build one from the pieces you already have. It's a little way to add kind of a mini game onto this hobby. And I've always really enjoyed it. So, hold on to your bits. Again, I really hope you guys don't take that clip out of context, but hold on to your bits. It will save you a lot of aggravation in the future. So, that's tip number 1. Silly mistake to avoid number 2. Rushing into a paint job. Don't do that. I know that might a little bit seem like it contradicts something I said in my last video about making sure to paint your minis. It actually doesn't, because while yes, I would argue you should paint all your minis, that doesn't mean you should rush into painting them. That doesn't mean you should just slap paint on there as quick as you can to get your stuff on the tabletop. Research what you're going to do beforehand. That is something that I didn't do for some of my minis, and I ended up having to replace whole squads when I realized that there were some mistakes I was making. Or when I looked something up and I realized, wow, my army would look so much better if I did this little thing. It either meant that I had to pull out a bunch of painted squads and add some details that I hadn't added, or in some cases, I just had to throw stuff out or sell off my minis to people who were going to completely repaint them altogether. So, research your paint scheme. Google is your friend. There are going to be lots of brilliant people out there with amazing paint schemes, and while you might not want to completely rip those off, inspiration will strike. I promise you. I don't think there's anyone out there who can look through all the amazing painters that are on the internet right now. Off the top of my head, Vito Verano and Chris Bello, of both formerly of Mini Wargaming, amazing painters. Vito has actually painted a couple minis for me. They came out amazing. Checking out his paint work, great place to start if you're looking for inspiration. But even if it's not people I'm mentioning, even if it's not like Siege Studios or Den of Imagination, there's so many people out there painting with so many original ideas. It's hard to imagine you won't find something that tickles your fancy and that you maybe want to put on your minis. So, research. If for no other reason, it will let you know what paints to buy before you go to the store. You don't want to come back with a bunch of paints you didn't need. You also don't want to come back from the store realizing that there's still like 4 paints you need that you didn't get. So yeah, doing a little research before you get started painting will really save you a lot of trouble and a lot of torn out hair like me. So, that's tip number 2 out of the way. Our third and final mistake to avoid is one that might just be something I've done. I don't know that anyone else I know has made this mistake. Maybe I'm just a dummy. Do not paint over your glue points. Don't do it. It's horrifying. And for those of you very new to the hobby, your glue points are the spots where 2 pieces of a miniature come together. That's where you want to put the glue, because it's going to cause the glue to bond together and make the model one homogeneous piece. Putting paint at your glue points stops the glue from connecting to the actual plastic, meaning the pieces of the mini have not actually bonded. I found this out the hard way 17 years into my hobbying journey. When I actually got started playing and I started dropping minis, because I promise you, if you're playing any miniature war game, you're going to drop your minis at some point. It's going to happen. If you've glued them properly, most of the time, they should be fine. Yeah, they might experience some breakage, but more than likely, if you drop a mini that's properly glued, it should probably stick together. Mine did not, because they weren't actually glued together. The paint was glued together. The actual plastic was not. And so anytime I dropped a mini, I got to find out just how many tiny parts there were on my minis, because they would go flying everywhere. I literally had built almost 20,000 points worth of Dark Angels when I realized I had been gluing them together wrong, and I have been slowly but surely repairing them and correcting them ever since. It's a journey that likely won't be done for many years, but I'm also not going to throw out my collection and start over. So, if you want to not be a dummy like me, do not paint over your glue points. Specifically, I managed to do it by spray painting my bits when they were still on the sprue. Now, I would actually recommend that process. This isn't really a painting channel, I'm not a painting guru by any means, but I actually really enjoy just spray painting the base coat onto my bits before I take them off the sprue. However, if you are going to do that, you need to do what I do and make sure to go back and scrape the paint off the glue points when you put the mini together. It's going to save you a lot of embarrassment, because trust me, there's nothing fun about being in a crowded room of fellow gamers, dropping your minis, and having them shatter to pieces, and everyone realizing, oh, does this guy not glue his minis? That was definitely the closest I've ever come to living out that nightmare where you're walking through high school and suddenly realize you're naked. Yeah, that was kind of what that was like for me. It wasn't fun. It may or may not have traumatized me a little bit, and I would like that to avoid that for you. I want good things for you, dear viewer, particularly if you've made it this far into my videos. So yeah, that's my last very obvious tip and the horror story that goes along with it. Glue your minis. Glue your minis, glue your minis, don't paint over your glue points. Oh dear God, don't do it. But yeah, so if you've made it through the video this far, I really appreciate it, because we have now reached the end of my tips on mistakes to avoid when you're just getting started. Yeah, I hope this was informative for you. I hope you guys learned something. I know I've reopened some trauma, so I'm gonna go have a good cry after this. But I have other videos up on the channel. If you guys would like to go check those out, I'm sure they should be appearing down the side of your screen, hopefully, if Algorithmo is doing his job. But I would love to see you guys over there. I'd love to see you down in the comments, have a little bit of a conversation. I'm looking forward to it. But in the meantime, happy wargaming.